Welcome to the Vadum podcast, where we share insights into today's defense tech challenges, unexpected adventures, and updates on what we are building to help protect what matters. Since 2004, Vadum's expertise has been bringing concepts to life as integrated capabilities and products to address many of the most challenging national defense problems. The Vadum team has a wide range of deep operational and technical experience to transform innovative concepts into high-impact solutions across a variety of domains, including cognitive electronic warfare, spectral situational awareness, air defense targeting, tactical edge AI and computer vision, explosive threat neutralization, and hardware-in-the-loop simulation, modeling, and testing solutions. Hello! Welcome to the Vadum Podcast, inaugural edition. We are here with Aaron Walker, founder and CEO of Vadum. Hello, Aaron.
Hello, Mark.
So, to get started, why don't you tell us how Vadum came to be?
Sure. Well, it was 2004. I had been at graduate school at North Carolina State for a couple of years working on my PhD, and all of the work that I was doing was sponsored by the U.S. Army in terms of their research lab on various different topics. Well, one of the topics that I was sponsored to be working on was, combating roadside bombs or IEDs, improvised explosive devices in Iraq and Afghanistan. And when we were performing that work, we got the opportunity to work, myself and one of the other students in my group, on a U.S. Navy base near D.C. that was focused on combating the roadside bomb threats. And the work that we were doing for them in conjunction with what I was doing in my PhD research, we identified an opportunity to basically form a company to continue that research and attempt to put products out into service. And so without a whole lot of additional thought and planning, we started the company up to work out of my home office. We had initial contracts with the group that we were working with in Navy to actually develop some test equipment so that you could basically do electronic forensics on the bombs that were being discovered in Iraq and Afghanistan and sort of automate the process of understanding how they worked. So that's where we got started.
So what's the difference between when you say electronic forensics versus what other investigations would people have been doing on the explosives?
So on the devices, it was very similar in how it was being I'd say trying to address the threat as a criminal sort of enterprise. The FBI had a big role, and so there was a lot of criminal forensics aspects to the counter-AD fight. Of course, there was things that you were putting on vehicles to protect, and there was obviously lots of sort of combat operations to defeat those types of devices. But the DoD focused on this is like an organized crime that had different layers in terms of folks that built bombs, things that funded them, people that emplaced them, people that initiated them. So they took the approach of trying to defeat the threat of these devices by prosecuting the people involved with it as if they were part of an organized criminal network. And so the forensics was literally similar to criminal forensics. Are there fingerprints left on bombs? Are there techniques used by the people building the bombs that indicate it's coming from a particular builder? Because it wasn't very democratic. I mean, there was handfuls of builder cells across the different countries, and sort of what the forensics was trying to do was figure out where had that device come from, and was it something new? Were there other devices that had been discovered like that? Also, they could sort of identify where the bomb makers were and try to remove the source of the bombs at that point before they ever sort of made it out onto the battlefield.
And so which was the specific part that you as Vadum were contributing to the overall effort?
Yeah, so there's two parts. The sort of electronic forensic piece, there were some relatively simple things early on in the use of these devices that were RF initiated. So basically you could have some kind of radio frequency remote to set these things off manually. And so the equipment that we put together helped characterize, what the operating frequencies were of these devices, like what the initiation signal was, so that you could catalog, because a lot of it was about cataloging the threats so that you can come up and sort of optimize the countermeasures that were being employed against them.
So how does that work after the fact? Like you're trying to analyze after an explosion or detecting new
No,
ones?
there were lots of things
live?
lots of things that were discovered before they went off. So, it's probably still true today, but even then there was a lot of emphasis on manual detection. So there was a lot of training on the U.S. personnel that would be part of convoys going up and down these roads across the country for different reasons. And they would claim that their sensor was the Mark I eyeball. It was basically like humans detecting that there was something amiss. So then they'd stop and then they'd go out and then they'd recover these devices. Or they'd stumble upon caches of these devices that were sort of being prepared and manufactured. And so they would catalog them. Yeah, although I would say usually the electronic piece wouldn't necessarily be destroyed in the attack because it would not have to be right on top of the explosive.
So what would that look like? Either something's already exploded, but there's a piece that exists, or they found ones that hadn't gone off. And then how do you play into that?
Yeah, so there was this big effort where there was literally, it was almost treated like a crime scene when you'd have one of these things go off, when one of these was found before it went off. And, they would survey those sites, render it safe if it hadn't gone off in terms of making it so it couldn't go off. And then they would sort of catalog all the components. Here's the explosive piece of it. Here's the electronics piece of it, how it's initiated. And so then after some initial exploit in country, and this is what we were developing, was to help the folks in country do this really, really rapidly. But what became apparent the larger the sort of phenomena got and the use of these devices got is they needed a larger sort of enterprise to prosecute. I mean, you're talking thousands and thousands of things recovered from the battlefield. And they all came back to this FBI facility, and they did all the exploit and forensics inside an FBI lab, and then sort of cataloged and disseminated that information. And then
how did Vadum get involved?
Yeah, so we got involved because the Navy group that we were working with was part and parcel of that, because the Navy group was a technical support activity and organization to do research and training and tactic development for explosive ordnance disposal. So EOD operators, who are a lot of the ones that were going out and doing the collection, because you had to, again, render these devices safe and then pick up all the pieces. And then where does that go? Well, it went into this machine that the FBI was point on. And so we were involved because we were related to that Navy facility. And then we sort of expanded from there. Some of the first contracts we got were supporting the next generation of jammers that were developed under this name called J-Crew. And as part of the J-Crew effort, we were working with some of the labs coming up with new jamming techniques. We developed a digital modeling and simulation environment the Navy used to evaluate jammers for their effectiveness against different types of threats on the battlefield. So we were involved both on sort of the forensic side to some degree, but also on the technique countermeasures and sort of exploring the solution space through simulation.
And so these were, what year was this, or what span?
So it started in 2004 and continued through most of our IED work, continued through like the 2007-8 when you had the surge of troops into Iraq under the Obama administration. And, then after, we started ramping down in both Iraq and Afghanistan, the emphasis of IEDs as a threat to worry about had decreased. So that sort of gets into sort of the next stage of Vadum, where we pivoted away from all things IED to more traditional electronic warfare, other types of analytics, other domains and disciplines within the defense space.
So what did that look like? Like, did you, as the IED threat was winding down, did you look at what capabilities do we have, where it might that be applied? And you realized you had effectively been doing a lot of RF signal analysis and effectively electronic warfare, but on a different scale and purpose.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. I mean, in essence, we always had some additional things that were not related to electronic warfare. Almost everything we did was, radio frequency RF in nature, but as part of the modeling threats, trying to understand how they worked, that meant we had a lot of understanding in not only communication systems, RF communication systems, but electronic countermeasures, jamming, those types of things. We knew a lot about RF. That's what our expertise was. A number of us that grew the early stage of Vadum. But yeah, electronic warfare was a sort of natural segue. And then the analytics aspect in terms of signal analysis or behavioral modeling, and those things were all sort of the existing capability sets that we brought to then other, sort of other domains in the defense space.
And it seems like, kind of in transition in between there was what you call the chipmunk. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the
it
chipmunk?
is true. Chipmunk, the origin of the chipmunk system was something that happened towards the end of that focus on counter IED. There was an existing system called a Jackal that was a particular type of countermeasure for certain types of IEDs that was mounted on a vehicle, but it had a lot of issues. It wasn't reliable from a, mean time before failure type of, it broke down because the thing that was at the heart and soul of it was not designed to be bumped around on a vehicle going down a sort of barely improved road. And so they sought a solid state replacement for high power microwave based system. And that's where we started, is designing a replacement for that, the entire system, not just all the things that were fragile, but also the entire system design. And so demonstrated really exceptional sort of standoff neutralization against this class of threats. And as the interest sort of waned from, IEDs, since we weren't encountering them as often as we were pulling out of Iraq and Afghanistan, the emphasis changed, though there was still interest within the Army community that sponsored it on what would become the Chipmunk system, which is basically a handheld high-power microwave IED defeat system.
Great. Okay. So then, one might jump to, could such a system be applicable to now the new, bigger threat around drones?
Yeah, and it's a good question. The same way, there's not sort of one class or one silver bullet for counter IED. The same thing is true of counter drone. I might say the challenge of counter drone is that the IED threat, as we experienced it as a nation, was somewhat narrow in its focus. And I think the delta with the drones is, and that means narrow as in the types of techniques used to initiate those weapons, whereas there's a lot more variety in the drone world, and things that may have worked in the counter IED space may not be as agile, flexible, etc. So I think there's utility for something like Chipmunk. The question is against the sort of full variety of threats in a counter UAS sense, is it the right type of tool for the problem? Is a good question.
Okay. All right. So sounds like, again, Vadum's got quite a set of capabilities, which, and then depending on what the scenario may be, which will obviously change over time, it's not solutions looking for problems, but problems of which, Vadum can be part of the solution.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is any one problem, if it's significant enough to sort of command national attention, like IEDs or hypersonics or counter UAS, there will never be sort of one solution, one size fits all. There will always be a need for defense in-depth concepts applied to the scale of the scope of the problem. And one of the things that, is finally maybe being learned is you can't just throw exquisite, expensive things at low-cost threats and expect to win a battle of attrition. So you need to sort of match the scope of your countermeasure against the scope of the threat so that the cost scale does not, sort of impede widespread defense.
Makes sense. All right. Well, I think that's good for today's episode. We will be back for everyone not the too distant future. So thank you, Aaron.
Thanks, Mark. Good to be here.
All right. That's all for today. Thanks.
All right. Bye.